Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Home to Her podcast. I am your host, Liz, joining you from Central Virginia and the unceded lands of the Monacan Nation. And I am so glad that you're joining me today. And hey, there's a couple things I want to tell you before we get into this. First, you've probably heard me acknowledge the Monacan Nation here before. These are the indigenous people who lived in Virginia for thousands of years prior to the arrival of European colonizers like my own ancestors. And they're still here as a federally recognized tribe. And if you're listening to the show, especially from the United States or Canada, the odds are really good you are residing on Indigenous lands too. So if you'd like to know whose lands you're on, you can look it up yourself at native-land.ca. I'll also put that in the show notes for you. And second thing I want to tell you, I have a book baby that is coming out into the world very soon. My book is titled, appropriately enough, Home to Her, and it's being published by Womancraft Publishing. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you would know that I've been lucky enough to have Lucy Pierce, who's the founder of Womancraft, here on the show twice before. And some of my fellow Womancraft authors have joined me here on the show before too. So my book is available for pre-order now, and it's going to be ready to ship worldwide in October of this year. So that's 2022. And it's my love note of sorts to the sacred feminine and just reflects a lot of what I've learned about her over the years, whether that's through my own research, through personal experience, and also through conversations that I've had on this podcast for the last couple of years. You can learn more about it and order it at Womancraft's website, which is womancraftpublishing.com. And I will put that in the show notes as well. And now let's get on with our show. So I feel so fortunate to get to be in conversation with some incredibly inspiring, pioneering women, and today is no exception. In fact, when I was sitting and thinking about, like, I want to say something kind of pithy and interesting before we get started, I just felt like everything was going to feel inadequate. All I want to do is introduce her to you. So that's what I'm going to do, because I feel like you're going to want to hear from her, as much as you can in this episode. Genevieve Vaughan is an independent researcher and scholar of semiotics, or the study of signs, symbols, and meaning making. She is also a peace activist and feminist who has championed the concept of the gift economy, where goods are given among people rather than bought and sold. The gift economy uses the matriarchal mother-child paradigm as a key basis of its structure. She is the founder of the Foundation for a Compassionate Society, a multicultural all-women activist foundation, which during its time of operation initiated many innovative projects for social change based on the political use of women's gifting values. Genevieve is also the author of several articles and books, including For Giving, A Feminist Criticism of Exchange, and The Gift in the Heart of Language, The Maternal Source of Meaning. She is the founder of the Temple of Goddess Spirituality, located in Nevada, USA. She is a co-founder of International Feminists for a Gift Economy and co-founder of the regularly recurring Maternal Gift Economy Salons, which is how I came to be introduced to her work. Genevieve currently splits her time between Austin, Texas, and Italy, and she's joining us today from her home in Austin. Genevieve, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so grateful to have you with me.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, yes. Well, I usually like to start these conversations getting a little bit of sense of people's spiritual background and what they were exposed to growing up, and because I think that helps us understand kind of how shapes how you got where you are. So I wonder if you would be willing to share a little bit of that to start off with.
Sure. Yeah. I was born Catholic, and my parents were fairly religious. And my grandmother was very religious, but anyway, when I was 11, my grandmother took me on a trip to Rome, Italy, to actually, we had an interview with the Pope.
Wow.
Well, we were with a group of priests and nuns and a few other non clerical people, and we got to meet the Pope, and he put his hand on my head, and my husband said, he ruined you for life. anyway, so I was a Catholic until I was about 16, when I had a deep questioning of religion and became an atheist. So then I was an atheist for, went to Italy, I married this Italian and went to Italy, and I was an atheist for about 15 years or more than that. And then when I came back to live in the United States in 1983, I ran into the goddess movement. I met women right away were in and it just totally made sense to me. The goddess made sense to me. And I gave up atheism and embraced the goddess. And it was, yeah, really a very, very cool transition, let's say. And as I said, even though I was an atheist, I had gone to Egypt with my husband, who then we got a divorce later, but we went to Egypt to just on a sort of trip. And we happened to go when we were in Luxor. We went into this room underground, sort of, with the guide. And there was this statue of Sekhmet, the goddess Sekhmet. And the guide told me, women come here and they give an offering or make a promise to the goddess, and they become pregnant if they want to. And so I had not become pregnant yet, and I wanted to, and I promised her that I would build her a temple.
Wow.
And like the next week, I got pregnant. So it was a very strong experience. And even though I had done that, even though at the time I was an atheist, so it was kind of very shocking and surprising. But at any rate, I knew I had to build her the temple at some point in my life. I should have done it right away, but it was not easy as an atheist to build the temple to the goddess. And then, but even so, I knew I had to do it. And I finally did do it when I came back to the US and became a goddess person, and I was able to finally able to do it. But I think maybe I'm interspersing too many different things at the same time.
No, well, that's great. I wanted to ask you about kind of how the divine feminine came into your life, and you did answer that. And I was wondering if you could tell, just for our listeners who maybe aren't very familiar with Sekhmet, who she is. I know she's the lion-headed goddess from Egypt, correct? But can you just say a little more about her?
Yeah. Well, in Egypt, this guide saw her as a goddess of fertility, but the actual stories about her are not that. She is a goddess that's very fierce, and the story is that she was the daughter of Ra, and she was going to punish all the humans for not obeying Ra by killing them. And the people appeased her by giving her red beer instead of blood, and she didn't kill everybody. So but she was a goddess of war, and so I had to kind of mediate between these two poles, you see. And as it happens, the place that I found to do the temple is right near the nuclear test site in Nevada. Oh. And so it is a place of war, but she is standing for peace in front of this whole war machine. And so she's a symbol of women's empowerment and the empowerment of life to stand up to all of this destruction that's going on. And it's really amazing because there was already a military base right there right next to, let's say, a mile away from where we've found to build this temple. And then the nuclear test site is maybe 15 miles away. So as we have been there since 1992, a lot of other military facilities have grown up all around it. And so it is this one little spot for peace in the middle of all of this war machine. And it turned out to be a very significant place to have it, and a significant place to stand for birth and life before the machine of death. So
wow, so powerful.
it worked out.
Yes, and I was making little notes to myself of things I want to. This often happens when I'm listing. I'm like, oh, I want to ask you about this and this and this. So we'll see if I can hold on to all these threads. But one thing I just wanted to say about Sekhmet that I always found interesting, I always like to see if there are parallels, in other traditions and cultures, and that fierceness of her, and also like her bloodlust. That's sort of the story that I had read, or the interpretation. Like she's like goes crazy and just wants to drink the blood and kill everybody. And it reminded me so much of the story of Kali, who gets a taste of the demon's blood, and I believe it's Rakta Bija, right? And she can't stop. Like she just keeps going and going, and something has to happen to appease her. And so I don't make any claim to, like, a scholarly claim of knowing for sure if those things are connected, but I find the overarching theme to be really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a fundamental theme that shows that women really are very powerful, and we can make these changes happen, and the kinds of destruction of the demon are completely opposite of what we are, and we need to stand up for what we are, what women are, what life is, what children are, and what men are at heart also, even though they get, and we all get, deviated into this horrible war mentality.
Yes, I guess the other thing I was thinking too, we were thinking about these poles of birth and then the fierceness. And however, I think many women who've given birth would know that there is, it is a very fierce act. It
Uh,
takes a tremendous amount of strength and power. And yeah, like a roaring lion in that moment feels extremely appropriate to me.
yeah, I'm just remembering that when I did give birth to my oldest daughter, I had this vision of a lion
Mm.
that while I was, and yeah, I just didn't even ever make the connection with Sekhmet between that and at that time. So thank you.
Oh, wow. You're welcome. Oh, I love that. That makes sense that you would have seen her since you called on her.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to come back to the temple too that you created, because just as I was reading about your work and your legacy, like one of the things that just was so powerful to me is the way that it seems like um, you've you've taken scholarship into action and practice. And so the Sekhmet temple, um, and I want you to confirm if I've got this right, but it seems like this beautiful intersection of spiritual practice, activism, and also what you have championed in terms of maternal gift economy values. But maybe before we talk about that, you can tell us a little bit about this idea of the maternal gift economy, where that came from and how that sort of came out of your life.
Okay. Well, I guess it's a long story because I started thinking about it back in when I was 24, so just after I got married. I married this philosophy professor also of semiotics, and he got invited in the very first year that we were married and living in Italy. He got invited by some other professors to start a magazine, a journal, that would be based on applying Marx's analysis of the commodity and money to language. And I went with him to hear about this idea, and I was just totally floored. And I had an aha moment, and it just made me, it sort of changed my mind in a big way. I'm not, I guess I won't go into what I thought of right then, but over time it developed, and my husband began to write articles about this, applying the idea of the market and money to language and seeing the similarities. And he wrote articles and books about that. And I was thinking about that too a lot. And I had little children, and I realized that the children didn't know how to exchange, didn't know how to use money. They had no idea of what the market was, and yet they could talk. So they learned how to talk before they learned how to exchange. And so I thought it must be coming, if there was an economy had anything to do with language, it must be before the market and not through the market. And so I thought about the gift economies of Native peoples that I had heard about or read about in college. And that made a lot of sense because they didn't have markets, and yet they spoke. They certainly had language. And so I thought, well, this is a gift economy. And that's what is the basis of language. And I was doing gifting with my daughters. I was not asking them to pay me back for anything I gave them. And so, and we were communicating that in giving and receiving and in speaking and all. And so I really began to see it, the basis of language, as this maternal gift economy. And then that is opposed to the exchange and all of the things that come out of exchange, which is quid pro quo, and which is that, if I give you, I will only give you this if you give me that. Mm-hmm. And that is an ego-oriented interaction, whereas the maternal way, the gift economy, is an other-oriented interaction because you want to satisfy the child's needs. And so there's these two paradigms, I believe. One is based on giving directly to satisfy needs, and the other is based on giving in order to receive an equivalent in exchange. So our whole economy that we call economy is based on exchange and quid pro quo, whereas our maternal economy, our basic economy, where we learn everything in the beginning, because as we're young children, before we ever even learn about the market, we have a whole lot of experience in just receiving and giving. And so that is where all of our early ways of knowing are laid down in the first years, and our ways of interacting. And it's relational. It's the way we create relations while we're also speaking, while we're playing, and being loving and being loved by our parents and others. If we're lucky, sometimes people are not, don't have that luck, but and they do grow up anyway. But that is because I believe that the whole structure of the way we know is transmitted, even by the fact that other people satisfy our needs, and they have to, because otherwise we don't survive.
Right.
So all the people who have survived have had that nurturing in childhood. And so that is the basis of really of a true philosophy that patriarchy has never understood because they weren't mothers.
Right.
They didn't do it. And they didn't usually have contact with the little children that much, at least in our society with the gender roles that we have. Yeah. Instead, in other indigenous societies and prehistoric societies, there's a kind of group nurturing that goes on, and where they have gift economies, and other people than the birth mother take care of children as well. And in many societies, you do also have groups of women who help the mother. So this is a whole different way of life that we have lost in our patriarchal capitalist world. And I really believe that that is the reason why we're in such a disastrous situation that we are now.
Yeah.
And if we can get back to it, if we can understand and even embrace the values that are in that maternal gift economy way, we can realize we're not this war-making species. We're not this destructive, exploitative, hateful species that is destroying the planet. We're actually a very maternal species that is able to give and receive all different kinds of gifts, and to consciously interact with the environment in a giving and receiving way. Mm. So that is really how. Then I began to write books about the gift economy, and I wrote some essays really early on, and then when I came to the U.S., then and after I did the foundation, while I did the foundation, which is trying to practice the gift economy, I wrote these books that I've been trying to explain it ever since. And
yes. Well, and I've been reading Forgiving. I'm taking my time with it because I want to, really absorb it. So it's going to take me a little while. But I think for those of us who were raised in, a economy or a culture that was shaped by European inspired patriarchy, right? Like it feels really foreign. And I know when I first started, it almost felt scary when I first read about it, because there was a sense of, the first thing that came up was a sense of fear about and a lack of trust, which I think, and because gifting requires faith in it, and it's all the things that I would talk about and be in conversation with people here on this show of there's a greater order to all natural world there, that we see it in nature all the time. There's a beautiful symbiosis, and there's a giving and receiving that is happening. And yet we have imagined ourselves as outside of that, or somehow like we are masters of our own destiny or something like that. And so to step back from that idea of master of our own destiny requires, and to relax into a gift mindset also requires faith that you're going to be held and that you're going to be supported. Yeah. So it's a little bit of like the ground, I think, shifting under your feet, when you start thinking about it.
Yeah, well, I think our economy, our market economy, discredits giving. Yes. And it wants us to always earn everything we get. Yes. And that otherwise we are not really good people some way. And we're less than, just as they are, the housework is discredited. Women's work in the home is discredited because it's not paid for.
Right.
And what we need is a whole economy that's not paid for,
Yes.
not to integrate every free part of life into the exchange economy, to commodify everything. Like, now people are having to pay for water and seeds and fertilizer and all of these things that big companies are making money off of, all of the things that used to be free. And we're, even the pollution that we create makes us need to even purify the air. And has become this kind of it's a parasite that taking over everything, and basically always has, because the exchange economy takes from the gift economy, and that's how profit is made, because piece of extra piece that the capitalists get from the free work of women, from part of the low cost work of people that are working in factories and mines and all over agriculture everywhere, and all of the free gifts of nature. So there's this flow of gifts that goes through the market, and nobody calls them gifts. They just call them profit, and the deserved profit, as if it were, it's an extraction all the way along, not just from oil and coal extracted from the earth, but extracted from people throughout, as well as from nature. So it's a system that's really crazy.
Yes. I was just thinking of resources, how even, like when I was in the business world, you called people human resources.
I know.
Or like, you refer to natural resources when you're really talking about gifts that you're exploiting. You're taking from the earth, right?
Taking free from the earth, and that nurtures you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an opposite. It's kind of the opposite of the mother.
Yes. Well, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on, because this makes so much sense to me that this would be our earliest human nature. And I forget who I read said something like this, like that's the whole survival of the fittest thing that doesn't characterize humanity. What characterizes humanity is compassion, because we wouldn't survive. Like, children are so helpless for so long, and you've got to care for them. But where, in your research and in your thinking about this, have you seen a particular point as children grow where we are kind of shifting the mindset away from that natural state of gifting and into exchange?
Yeah, I've read about it, and the one book that really talks about that I've read, and is about two women, Bertie and Bombi are their names, and they located at about 3 years old. But children begin to understand exchange, the quid pro quo, about then. But then they don't totally understand it until they get to be maybe 10. They understand how the whole market works. So, and that is also the time when our brains are becoming lateralized. And so that the exchange way becomes kind of normal when we're lateralized towards the left brain and language and logic. And in a way, it's really too bad, because it like sticks inside of our brain. It gets us. And and now too, it's even worse, because there's so much advertising to little children that I think it's probably making the switch earlier. And so it's harming us, all this advertising to little children, and even all the whole well, I don't want to go into the whole cell phone thing in babies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Well, I'm curious too. If are you familiar with the book, the Leonard Shlain book, "Language versus the Goddess"? Did you ever
yeah,
read that?
right,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
curious, which he sort of argues that the rise of written language correlated with the descent, right, or the letting go of our idea of mother goddess. And I'm
Sorry.
oh,
See,
that's okay. No worries. I'll start over. We can just edit that part out. It's all good.
great. I hope it doesn't happen again.
So I'm curious though, if what you think of Leonard Schlain's book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, which is this idea that, well, I'm vastly oversimplifying it, I'm sure, but that the rise of written language led to the downfall of the goddess. And I know he talks a lot about this right brain versus left brain, and that um, we move out of the, okay, I'm going to stop because I don't remember the book well enough to, I feel like, to say it right, but maybe I'll stop there and ask you, do you feel like that's in conflict with where you landed, or
No, it's quite similar, really, except I see the dividing line more as when the market began to be generalized, as
okay.
in, like, and when money started, which was
Okay.
in 600 BC, at least the way some people calculate it, in Lydia in Greece. Um, and um, and so I think the big change happened then, but probably also that I believe the brain was prepared for the exchange the by writing. So
Okay.
two stages, maybe first writing and then exchange, that made it worse.
Okay.
And yeah, so there is a writer named Alfred Sohn-Rethel who talks about the exchange abstraction and how the interaction of exchange, especially for money, makes us do something that's abstract in reality, because money does not have any value in itself. It's just an abstract thing that we use to exchange with. And that abstraction, he thinks, has influenced philosophy from the beginning, from pre-Socratics all up until Kant and Newton and all of that. And he gives a lot of descriptions of how it's done. So I believe this is probably right, that there is this abstraction that comes after money and is introduced. And especially when you're using money all the time, like we are. And so it gives us part of our explanation of the world is abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't even respect the concrete things that people do to nurture and to care for each other, and even to interact with the world. All of those things that are not exchanged and are not abstract, we don't see them very well because we have these abstracted glasses on.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that is what I think has happened to take us away from the goddess and from the maternal gift economy. And it places us in a situation where we have one standard, as in money, and then everything else is compared to it. So it's just like a patriarchal God that has one standard for everything, and lays down the law, and
Yes.
leaves out the mother and the earth and the nurturing of the earth, because the patriarchal God takes over the whole nurturing role, even though it's from above and from an abstract and from outside.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And so I'm like, tell us what to do, Genevieve. I feel like I mean, there can be a sense of like overwhelm, right? When you look at where we are and how tangled and I want to use the word lost, how lost we are perhaps from these origins, like this original nature um, of compassion and gifting. And so I am curious what you might say, or how have you in your life practiced, experimented with, leaning into this idea of a maternal gift economy while also facing the reality that what's around us is very much not that.
Well, first of all, I've tried to explain it. I've tried to show people what I see. And I think now at this point in his story, that we have to really see the gift economy if we want to survive. And we have to learn that we can practice it and follow those values instead of the values of this me first, neoliberal capitalist, patriarchal way. The planet is not going to survive otherwise. And humanity won't. So we need to realize that we are not even a Homo sapiens species, because we don't know what's going on, and sapiens is knowing. And we're certainly not Homo economicus. We're actually a species that is Homo donans, the gifting species, and a maternal species. We're a widely maternal, an intensely maternal species that has kind of gotten this strange idea of the market and exchange and capitalism and money that's kind of gotten implanted in our minds, and we're looking always through those glasses, and we're doing things that are according to that interpretation of the world instead of according to the interpretation of the gift economy. And there are so many indigenous societies still that didn't have market exchange before they were invaded by us. And many of them still do practice gifting and have a whole other kind of spirituality that includes the earth, not a power over the earth, but that includes the earth, or the earth includes them. So we do have these other models, and there are still matriarchies that exist that are not mirror images of patriarchy, but egalitarian societies with mothering values. And they're already there. So we do have some examples of a way we could go. But I think that if we begin to realize that we are not this patriarchal capitalist being, and that our value of our egotistic value of thinking, we have to be the best and the wealthiest and the strongest and all of those things, even as nations and as corporations. This kind of image has just been propagated everywhere, and now the different nations are fighting with each other to see who's going to be the biggest and the best. as now, and as has been also throughout history, but now we have such an amount of technology that we can just destroy each other and everything. So we are not the species that's doing that. We are a maternal species. And that behavior is alien to us, and it hurts us, each individually as well as whole groups of people. And it makes us worse towards each other as well. It makes us racist and sexist and nationalist, and so we need to have this reawakening as a maternal species, and in practice that means a respect for women's values, basically. And I started, of course, I've gotten more into all of this more and more as the years have passed, and now with the crisis that we're in since 2000 and 2010, and now particularly in the environment crashing around us, it's even more and more and more important. And I started out when I came back to the United States in 1983. I started trying to create, trying to get a foundation, and I had what was called a private operating foundation, where we did our own activities that other people joined. So we had a retreat center that women and men could come to free or very low cost, and they used it for their weekends and their meetings and everything. And so I thought, women especially have never had people give anything to them free. They haven't had the experience, because we were always told we have to pay for whatever it is, or we're not respectable or respectful. And in fact, our society has a lot of fail-safes to keep us from doing gifting and receiving. And they're like, it's kind of immoral almost to receive a gift free. And so I tried in practice to generalize that as much as I could from the beginning. And then we did a lot of activism of various kinds, anti-nuclear work, and a lot of different things. In the website, you can see some of the many different things that we did. We also had a goddess program, and work went on for about 25 years. And there were a lot of women that worked in the foundation. Was multicultural. Also, we had a number of international people that worked in it, and doing all these different projects. We had women's radio, one radio program that it was called Wings. It still exists, that a woman named Frida Worden has been doing for all these years. And she had started it, but then she joined us later. And it is a program of women's voices from all over the world and all different on all different issues. And then another program called FIRE, Feminist International Radio Endeavor, that was in Costa Rica. And it did similar things, and went to women's conferences and heard women's opinions on everything. So those were another two. And there were just a lot of different things we did. Anti-nuclear, as I said, there was a peace caravan that went around the country and talked about anti-nuclear stuff. I mean, it's a long story and I can't go into all of it, But yeah, so we practiced that and did that was the practice of the gift economy as far as I could manage. And then I met a woman named Heidi Gottner Abendroth who did a conference in 2003, I believe it was. No, maybe it was earlier than that. Maybe, I don't remember right now. Anyway, this was a conference about matriarchal studies. She's a German woman who has initiated matriarchal studies of modern matriarchal societies that are still matriarchal. And as I said, still egalitarian, not power over. And so she had a conference on that in Luxembourg, and I went to that conference, and I was really so happy to find out about her ideas and about the matriarchal societies that still exist. And since then, we've collaborated several times, and we had a conference on matriarchal studies in Texas in 2005, I think it was. And I also and then we had a big conference on the gift economy in 2004, and then we also had other conferences during this time to try to promote the values of gifting. So we did just a whole lot of work over the years.
Well, and I wanted to ask you too. Well, I guess I'd like the Sekhmet Temple as well, right? You would also, and that's still going, isn't it?
Yeah, we started that in 1992.
Okay.
On the anniversary of the invasion of the Americas. Remember the 500-year anniversary of Columbus.
Yes. Okay.
And I gave the land back to the Shoshone, whose land it originally was all around there, and that land that's still being used by the nuclear test site and the Army in Air Force installations. Anyway, so just a second. So
yeah, well, and I'm curious, if we fast forward now to where we're at now, what do you see in terms of this idea of the gift economy? Do you see it I was trying to think of examples that I might see. I don't know if you would think of like that. I don't know if you're familiar with the buy nothing movement, for example, or if you would consider that part of it, or do you see, I'm like looking for the right word, like sparks of light or somewhere, where better understanding of this is taking hold?
yeah, there are lots of there are lots of experiments in the gift economy. There's a man named Charles Eisenstein that wrote about that, and a lot of people are following him. And there's the Buy Nothing movement. I think it's great. There are lots of eco villages that people are trying to practice gifting in, or non-monetary economies in, but they don't connect it with mothering. And so all of that could be united according to this other paradigm, this maternal paradigm that we all have. And boys have too, because boys also have mothers. It's not that they don't follow the maternal model when they're little. They all do. All of the children do.
Yeah, and I would say, like, for this generation, and certainly for my kids' generation too, I think parenting, you're practicing those nurturing roles in a different way than, let's say, like my father, who wasn't really present, and certainly my mother's generation. But my partner, for example, is has always been really in there with the kids.
Yeah, it's so good for the children, and
Yes.
especially for the boys, so they realize, but for both, that they realize that gifting is something, nurturing is something that everybody needs to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that this change in roles is wonderful, but it's not happening soon enough.
Yeah.
It has to really be radical, and it has to happen on a big scale. You may have a nurturing husband and father, but the father of the country is not nurturing.
Right.
He can be, a very big bully, as we have recently seen. And all of the posturing, and not just posturing, the fighting between nations is totally according to a male exchange model where you take vengeance, and vengeance is exchange against the person or the country that has harmed you. And and it's all a commercial model underneath everything. And we don't even though men are becoming more nurturing and more gifting and are happy to do that, it's liberating for them as well as for women. It's not happened near enough on the big scale, and money has taken over, the place of the power, so that the more money you have, the more important you are.
Yeah.
And the people that don't have money are not important. And it's as if by getting money, we have gotten the biggest gift. It's as if God has blessed us with having more money, and so we're better.
Well, yes. And there's a whole, I mean, there's like the prosperity doctrine, right? Of, modern evangelical Christianity. And I think you see it, unfortunately, in the more of a new age movement too, with this idea of manifestation. Like you can just bring it all into you. And I know Sherry Mitchell has been part of the Maternal Gift Economy Salons. And I heard or read her say at some point, which I thought was so wonderful, that it was like children playing with manifestation, like, let's see what I can get for me. It's all about me rewarding myself, and like money and a big house. And it's
Yeah,
and
yeah.
of course that those powers are available to us, but it shouldn't be about enriching ourselves. It should be about healing.
Yeah, making a world okay for everybody. And
Yeah.
and it really is a different kind of personality that is in harmony with the maternal values, that is looking at the needs of everybody, of nature, and of people in other countries, and rather than just a me first thing. But I kind of think that may happen because of what we do when we're mothers of young children, because when we give to them, we give value to them, and so they feel self-esteem. But if there are two children and one gets nurtured and the other one doesn't, the self-esteem gets altered. And so the one child that doesn't get it is feeling lower, and the one that does get it is feeling more important. And it's as if in our economy, the ones that have gotten more money feel more important and better
Yes.
than
Oh
the people
gosh.
who have less.
Yeah.
And so they feel like God is um, blessing just them.
Yeah.
And it's just it just is too bad, because and it is God rather than goddess, because goddess would be giving to everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I've been reflecting on this in your work, and I've been thinking about like the ideal of where we might want to be versus where we are now. And um, on the one hand, it can feel like such a great chasm, like there's this huge separation. However, I was thinking about, perhaps there's, like, I'm imagining it as like an unraveling of sorts, an unraveling of really toxic, unhealthy practices. And perhaps the first step of that unraveling is awareness. Um, Also in gifting, I think there's the word atonement keeps coming up for me, which I know it's got a lot of religious but righting wrongs, cleaning up the messes that we've made because of this really um, messed up mentality and direction that we've been on. So, for example, I'm familiar with a group here in Virginia that's called Decolonizing Abundance. And so it's kind of like buy nothing, but if you look at buy nothing, it's a very neighborhood movement. Well, you've got concentrated wealth in neighborhoods. So you're not necessarily moving gifts all the time to people who really, really need them. And so the idea with the decolonizing abundance is that you're trying to create a forum where those people who have more and got that through, just an unfair system, have a way to funnel that excess directly to people who need it without having to go through the intermediary of nonprofits or whatever, which are also kind of caught up in that structure.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And also now, there are a lot of women's funds that have sprung up over the many years. And I know a woman who basically started those. And so I think it's very cool that is a big part of a movement for social change. Although, like you said, there is a lot of bureaucratization along those. And so I think we have to really be careful about that being assimilated. I think one of the ways that we can transform ourselves towards a gift economy is really seeing the gifts that already exist. When you say to somebody, "How are you?" you're asking, "What are your needs?" And actually, all kinds of interactions are giving the other person something that they can receive in order to understand you and what the situation is. You smile at somebody that looks sad, and that's a gift, and we do it all the time. And I have made a lot of big effort to show that language and communication are based on gifting. Well, we usually look at it at language as something that's abstract, with abstract syntax rules, and that is genetically inherited. But let's see, the early life of every human being is in a gift economy, and the giving and receiving, I believe, is the actual basis of syntax and of language. Words are gifts for perceptual gifts. Anyway, I went through that, and I've written a lot about it because so much of our lives so much of academia is based on an abstraction. All of the different sciences are abstract, and they're all due to this exchange abstraction. They all have that setting. But we can go back from that and reclaim so many things in life for the giving and receiving rather than for abstract logic. And the giving and receiving does have a logic of its own. If A gives to B and B gives to C, then A gives to C. So if I give to you and you give to somebody else, that goes along. The gift passes on. And that's how we create the gifting communities. Everybody is giving to everybody else, and that implies that we're all valuable to each other. And it doesn't have to do with the value of exchange. It has to do with the value of the people and of satisfying each other's needs. So that makes it very different. And I tried to look through my exchange glasses and see the gifts that are behind that. And even, they're gifts even within the exchange economy as it is. Like, you can give somebody a loan, that's a gift, even if then it can be really a terrible thing to have to pay it back. So, but there are, if loans are scarce, then the person needs a loan, then you satisfy their need. And it's, in a way, it all kind of compacts it, and things compact into each other when you get into the whole exchange mode. But even communication, I think, is based on this, is the word communication is communication, and muni means gifts in Latin. So communication is giving gifts together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's so
And
beautiful.
it is. And I think that's what we're doing. And we don't realize it. So whenever you can find a gift that's behind the exchange glasses, it's a step ahead. And I
Yeah.
believe that if we can find enough of those, it's very convincing to everybody that we are really this homo donans. We are really gifting beings and not exchange beings. Yeah.
I love that. Well, and I know we're almost out of time, but I have one more question for you. And I also recognize that this could change day to day depending on what's happening in the world. But I'm wondering, you've dedicated your life to doing this work, and how are you feeling about our future? Do you find hope for us, or does it depend on the day, or do you think we're going to figure this out before we annihilate ourselves?
Well, yeah, I think we have to be positive, and that I think there is a flow of solutions, that it's kind of like a river with a lot of different currents in it.
Yeah.
And the currents are separate for now, but they can come together, and that is going to bring us to a totally better place. If we stop doing that, I think we don't have any hope.
Yeah.
So we have to just do as much as we can in the best ways we can.
Mhm.
And we have to recognize the situation we're in.
Yeah.
Especially the environment. And it's hard not to recognize if everything's burning now.
I know.
And if not, it's flooding. So, and we need to stop making wars.
Yeah.
And stop exploiting people. And so, yeah.
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just say I'm 82. So I don't know how many years ahead of me I have, but I feel blessed that I have anything to give at this point, that there is something that I can do, and I keep doing it. And so I still haven't finished figuring out all of this gift and exchange mess. so I welcome anybody that wants to come to our salons that we're going to start having again in the fall. So
Yes, they are wonderful. And I will put a link in the show notes so people can find them. It's great because if you can join live, it's wonderful, but they're also just recorded so you can catch them later because they're on the weekend. So sometimes, I know that can be tricky for people, but yes. And I want to thank you so much for the gift of your time and sharing all of this. It's wonderful, wonderful to be in conversation with you. And I want to walk away. So maybe listeners will walk away too with this idea of the rivers, and like the idea of like, let's see, we find our own stream to step into, and flow with it and know that uh, they all eventually lead back to one source, one heart. And there's that trust, I think, that comes up for me again too, faith that just the small efforts that we do to change our course it will matter.
yeah, and we need to keep our eye on the big picture too, because because the little picture is connected to the big picture.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I always say the greatest gift that you can give to a woman is the floor. And you have given me a floor to speak from. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for taking the floor. I always say that the purpose of this podcast is to amplify these really brilliant voices that are all out there that I think need to be heard more. So anybody who gets to hear this, I think is going to be blessed. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thanks to all of you guys, as always, for listening. You like the show, do me a favor. write up a little short review. It really does help other people find the show, or you can tell a friend about it. You can subscribe to it. But you can do all those things if you're feeling so inspired. And until next time, take good care.